Today, more than a week into month 2 of my strict 60 days on the ketogenic diet combined with intermittent fasting, I'm just blown away by the results so far. The question is, how and why does it work so fast and so well? Welcome to Get It Together, and if you're new here, this channel is just me trying to figure out how to get my life together and sharing the tips and lessons I learned along the way. As you gather from the intro, today I'm going to talk about the scientific reasons as to why keto, clean keto, combined with intermittent fasting of at least 18 hours a day, produces such incredible results so quickly in terms of fat loss. But here is the overarching premise. With the rise and consistent presence of insulin in our bodies, there's a direct correlated rise in body fat and weight. That therefore means that when we reduce insulin, we reduce fat, we reduce weight. It's as simple as that. This video is just broken down to 3 really quick, simple portions. Section 1 is what most of our diets have been our whole lives. Section 2 is how the ketogenic portion of this combo solves the problem of weight, fat, and insulin resistance. And part 3 is how the other equation, which is intermittent fasting for at least 18 hours a day, double ends that into a perfect storm that accelerates results beyond my imagination anyways when it came to fat loss and reverting any damage I had done with insulin resistance and prediabetes. So let's talk about briefly what the current state of most people on Earth, what their diets are. External carbs and glucose is definitely not needed at all by the body. Our body is able to create our own glucose for the small amount of glucose that our bodies need internally as fuel. But for the most part, our bodies are totally fine using ketones as fuel. In fact, they prefer it. Meanwhile, though, in the standard diet that most of us are used to having, we're just packing, just shoving carbs and sugars non-stop into our bodies. And so what happens? Every single time we eat, period, we spike insulin. And then obviously the more sugar and carbs we have, the higher the insulin spikes. And so if we're having multiple meals and snacks in between and they're all full of carbs, then all we're doing is just spiking the insulin nonstop inside of our bodies. And again, irrefutable scientific fact, whenever there is a rise in insulin, both in quantity and frequency, there's a directly correlated rise in body fat in our bodies. This is the reason why there's an obesity epidemic. Before I get into the solutions, I just want to thank everybody who's following me on Instagram to keep me accountable with the risk of losing $200 to one of you, where I have to post my meals and a daily tip or lesson I learn about keto and or intermittent fasting. And if I fail to do so one day, the first person that calls me out gets $200 via PayPal. But let's hop right into why a combination of healthy keto with intermittent fasting put together fixes the problem, reverses the damage done so quickly. So again, when we see this direct correlation between frequency and quantity of spikes in insulin with gained weight and gained fat, the solution is pretty damn simple. Remove the quantity of carbs and sugars that we bring into our bodies and reduce the frequency with which we do so, period. So removing the frequency is intermittent fasting. If you have an eating window of 4, 5, 6 hours a day, that means you have 18 to 20 hours where there's just no spike in insulin, period. You have removed the frequency of insulin spikes. Which means even if you weren't doing keto and you were only doing intermittent fasting at a strict schedule, you will see results. But again, intermittent fasting is just doing one end of the problem solved, which is reducing the frequency of insulin spikes. By doing the ketogenic diet, what you're doing is double-ending it, reducing the frequency with intermittent fasting, and then reducing the sheer quantity of insulin spiking. The ketogenic diet does this by just limiting the amount of sugar and carbs that we have, restricting it tremendously. This means that when we get the 70+% of our calories from fat, and we get the 20-ish% of calories from protein, the amount of insulin that spikes up is much lower than if we were eating sugars and carbs. This ketogenic diet does exactly what it says on the tin. It puts our body into a state of ketosis. So what is that? Well, if we have sugar and carbs, then our bodies convert that into glucose, and glucose is used as fuel for our bodies. But if we deprive our bodies of external glucose, then our bodies have to use a whole other type of fuel. Instead of using glucose, it uses ketones. And ketones are made out of fat. Our bodies prefer using ketones as fuel, and so if we starve our bodies of glucose by not eating carbs or sugars, which again, our bodies literally don't need any of from external sources, then we are forcing our body to not use glucose as a source of fuel, but instead use fat, use ketones made out of fat as a source of fuel. So where can the body get ketones from? Well, part of the ketones that it gets are from the dietary fat that we eat, but the other part, of course, is taking the fat that's already in our bodies, making ketones out of that, and using that as fuel. And so by transitive property, higher frequency and quantity of insulin creates fat gain. Therefore, lower frequency and lower quantities of insulin creates fat loss. And how do we get super accelerated with this? We double end it by reducing the frequency of insulin spikes via intermittent fasting, while simultaneously reducing the quantity and the intensity of insulin spikes by just not consuming anywhere near as much carbs and sugars that we're typically doing right now. I explained this in the previous video, but this combination truly is a match made in heaven. So really, what should we eat? Well, that's the next video where I'm going to be talking about my go-to meals. If you have any questions or want to debate anything, be sure to hit the comments below. If you got value out of this, hit like and subscribe. And if you want some tips and to help keep me accountable, hit up my Instagram right over here. See you in the next one.